The Mummy, I think, is a bootleg Billy Zane. Throughout the course of the movie, I was thinking, why didn't they just get Billy Zane to do this? It seems like it's just an easy tee up that they whiffed on.
Meet Sarah and Samantha.
Two cousins obsessed with exploring the vast pop culture landscape, one recommendation at a time.
In each episode, one clueless cousin shares real-time reactions as they navigate the twists and turns of a pop culture topic selected by the other.
From travel to movies,
Little Debbie's to trashy novels.
Get ready to eavesdrop on the candid reactions and dynamic conversations you can only have with family.
This is Foreign and Familiar.
Welcome to Foreign and Familiar. We are back for season 3. My name is Sarah.
I am Samantha, and we're so excited.
We are so excited. We had to redo our intro because we just hopped right into it.
We looked right at each other and just started giggling and saying it's so nice. So Sarah, as always, amazing to see your face. My lovely cousin. I'm so obsessed with you. I'm obsessed
with you. And I'm so excited that we are back for season 3. We have an amazing lineup of things to talk about. Of course, an amazing lineup of Little Debbie's. I couldn't wait to record today.
No, it's going to be fantastic. And I think we're going to get into it. Of course, our signature tagline. We're going to get into all the different things. But since the end of season 2 and between now and the start of season 3, Sarah and I have notched another country off our travel list. We were in Ireland this summer together. We saw the Eras tour. That's going to be a bonus episode for sure.
We've got to talk about that Midnight's bodysuit because we're obsessed with it.
It's dominating the group text, but again is for
the bonus up.
For the bonus up. Aside from that, the other big update that we have is Sarah has been really meticulous all summer while she's been off school to be uploading content and shorts over to the Foreign and Familiar YouTube channel. And so if you like to listen to your podcasts on YouTube in the background, make sure you go over there and give us a follow. Sarah, what is the address or the channel?
It is just Faux Fan Pod on YouTube, and this season in particular, we'll have a lot of new content on there that won't be on Instagram or the podcast episodes, so definitely check it out.
Awesome. Well, as we all know, podcasting is sweeter with a snack. And getting into season 3, we still have a variety of our snack of choice, Little Debbie's, that we're going to be discussing this season. So, Sarah, season premiere, what is the Little Debbie that we are kicking off with to vault ourselves? It was just the Summer Olympics to vault ourselves into season 3.
Well, I thought we should probably start off season 3 with a classic that's one of my favorites, and that is the Swiss roll. The Swiss roll is described on Little Debbie's website as a chocolate cake rolled around a layer of cream filling and coated with fudge.
Other people would maybe call it a ho-ho.
Yeah, ho-ho is the Hostess brand, and I think you kind of get into that territory of what's a ho-ho, what's a Swiss roll.
It's kind of like Kleenex and tissues, right?
Right, yeah.
So I understand that Hostess has the ho-ho, but I would call Swiss rolls ho-hos.
It's also interesting that the Swiss roll celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2013. So recording this in 2024, it's about 61 years old. It's been around for a while.
It's a treat of many. I'm actually surprised that we're at the beginning of season 3 and that we're just covering the Swiss roll and the ho-ho now, because I feel like it's such a fundamental staple of Little Debbie's lineup.
Yeah, absolutely. If you look at on their website at their like classic bundles, the Swiss roll is always included. Now, I know I've rated some movies or shows that we've talked about as a Swiss roll, but we have not done an introductory deep dive of the Swiss roll. So I agree. I don't know why it's taken us so long.
I find it interesting that the description on the website says it's coated in fudge. I would say it was coated in chocolate. But
right.
My thoughts on the Swiss roll, I mean, as you said, we have used it to rate things that are very comforting to us that we really enjoy. So I would say I think this is a classic Little Debbie. I don't think you can go wrong. I find that I don't necessarily buy boxes of them as much as maybe I used to, but I will always take a Swiss roll. I will always take a ho ho. It's just delicious. It's comforting. It's a nice little treat. I find it to be satisfying.
I agree. I totally agree. It's a staple. I don't find myself buying them as much just because through our podcasting, I've definitely been introduced to a lot of Little Debbies that I wasn't necessarily a diehard fan of before. So I've widened my horizons, I think, but Swiss roll is just such a classic I can always go back to.
I feel like that was the lunchbox Little Debbie. Either those or the Star Crunch I really associate with school at home packed lunches. We definitely weren't getting the brownies and stuff in our lunchbox, but very comforting, very delicious, sweet enough. There's always a little bit of the cake that gets stuck on the bottom
Right, so you have
piece
to
of
scrape it off
cardboard
with your teeth.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of that. No,
Right.
I'm kidding. No, it's wonderful. It's classic. I would actually go so far as to say that if someone says that they don't like Swiss rolls or they don't like ho hos, there's something wrong with them. I think it's a perfect little treat. Now, I will say, just speaking out of both sides of my mouth immediately, that the Hostess ho ho I don't even think is in the same category and or league as the Little Debbie Swiss roll. I think it's a lot more waxy. I think it's a lot denser. So I would not eat a Hostess brand ho ho, but yeah, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I completely agree. I think Little Debbie is the superior snack cake across the board. I agree. It's definitely like a lunchbox snack. And I think growing up, it was almost a rite of passage when I finally was able to eat both of the Swiss rolls that came in the package instead of just one and having to share with somebody or save it for later. At least that's what I thought. I thought, wow, I'm finally old enough to eat two.
Yeah, Sarah, I think that that's just you because I
That's
would
just me.
never share. Yeah, I would never share my Swiss rolls. What are you talking about?
I
They're
don't
so
know.
tiny.
They are
It's
so
not like
tiny.
it's
Right.
two of them's the perfect amount though. Now, I will say something that is relatively new is there is a cherry variety of Swiss rolls, which is exactly the same. It's just a cherry flavored cream. And I know that we've tried those in advance. So, Sarah, what are your thoughts on the cherry variety of the Swiss roll?
I think initially I was of the mindset, why would you change something that works so well? But they are surprisingly delicious, and I was pleasantly surprised by them.
So I would say a little bit of the opposite. Cherry is my favorite fruit flavor, other than I would say passion fruit. I don't really feel like I got a ton of cherry flavor in the cream. It tasted like a normal Swiss roll to me. Of course, I like everything pink, but so it is nice to bite into the Swiss roll and see a little tinted pink cream. But for me, if the cream wasn't that color, I don't know that I felt like I would know it was a cherry Swiss roll. And I don't think that we've done the cherry cordial Little Debbie yet, but I think that I just really like in your face cherry flavor. And so I'm not saying I wouldn't eat them, but I just didn't think it was there for me. But maybe I need to try it again.
I think there are a couple that we've tried, and initially I've either really liked them or haven't, and then the more I ate them, my opinion has changed. So we can keep testing that one.
Speaking of things that you definitely have a reaction to right away, Sarah, what is our first topic that we are going to tackle here in season 3?
Well, we like to start off every season with something that's exciting, that's action packed. So I picked one of my favorite action movies, and that is the 1999 action adventure movie, The Mummy, starring none other than Brendan Fraser, of course.
So, Sarah, I was excited to watch this because This one, obviously, I had not seen before. It is celebrating its 25th anniversary, which is kind of hard to believe. So let's tee it up. Sarah, why did you recommend this movie and why did you think that I would like it?
Well, through our 2 seasons of podcasting, and of course, all of the discussions outside of that, we've kind of shared our love of action movies. Me in particular, those like 90 action movies that I think are just so fun. I think Brendan Fraser is probably one of my favorite actors from that time period. And I don't know how you feel about Brendan Fraser, Sam, but I think he has gotten a lot of love recently, especially after The Whale came out and was so successful. Aside from that, I think it's a relatively big cultural film. There are a lot of things culturally surrounding this. It's become quite a large franchise. There's the ride at Universal Studios. There's just a lot going on with this film. So I thought it would be fun to introduce you to that.
Well, Sarah, you know that I have thoughts on Brendan Fraser. Even if you don't know what they are, you know I have them and notes.
Exactly. Yes.
So we absolutely are going to get into it here. What information do our listeners need to know if they're unfamiliar with The Mummy and the Mummy franchise?
So this franchise actually goes back quite a ways. It is a remake of the 1932 movie The Mummy starring Boris Karloff. The plot is fairly similar in a lot of ways, but of course it has been updated because it was made in the 90s, not the 30s. It was directed by Stephen Sommers. There are quite a few awards and nominations for the music, the makeup, the effects at the time. Since this movie has come out, it has kind of exploded into this larger franchise with 3 movies centered around this main cast that we'll be talking about today, an animated TV show, a spin-off prequel starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. We had a 2017 reboot starring Tom Cruise. And of course, the roller coaster ride in Universal Studios. So there's just so much to this movie.
It's a sneakily large franchise when you look at it. And I will say during some of my research for this movie in particular, what I found was interesting is that George Romero, who is a icon in horror and zombies and so on and so forth, had been attached to this movie, specifically this 1999 version movie, on and off while it was in development. He didn't ultimately have connection to the final one, but it was a project that he was involved in. So I thought that that was really interesting. To your point, Sarah, it was nominated for an Oscar and Academy Award for Best Sound. So let's give them their flowers on that for sure. And I do absolutely want to talk about the ride at Universal Studios. So obviously there's the Mummy roller coaster at Universal Studios down in Orlando, Florida. And I went there for the first time when I was 18. I had just graduated high school, and The Mummy had come out within the past, let's call it 5 to 10 years. And the ride was brand new, and there were lines all the way around the block. And when I finally got in and rode it, it was hands down the best ride in the park. But I hadn't seen the movie, so I didn't really I was just from a thrill perspective and from enjoying. There were lots of twists and turns. I had a really great time. I was back down in Universal maybe in 2017, 2018, wrote it again. And surprisingly, as everything happens, it's a little bit out of the zeitgeist, had to not wait at all, was able to get right in on the ride. And it was as fun and as awesome as I remembered. But as I was watching this movie, what I found was really interesting is all of a sudden I'm thinking, oh, well, on the ride, I get it now. And this is so much more interesting. So it was nice to kind of put in the layer of riding the Mummy ride, actually understanding the property 20 years after I wrote it for the first time. So that's my experience with the Mummy. Thank you for bringing in that cultural example to me, or like layering in that layer. But what's your experience with the ride?
Right. So I think we had the opposite experience where when I went to Universal, also right after I had graduated high school for the first time, I was already
First time that you graduated high school? How many times have you graduated high school?
Let me rephrase that.
What are you, Edward Cullen and the
Yeah,
Cullens?
I just keep going back, and I make a collage out of all my graduation hats on the
He
wall.
literally says in the Twilight movie, and I quote, "We matriculate a lot." So maybe that's just you, Sarah. Anyway, so
Thank
you
for bringing that Twilight reference into the pod. I was familiar with The Mummy before going to Universal. The ride was just an added layer into my appreciation of the fandom. I loved the ride, of course, because of the reference to The Mummy, but also just because it is a really exciting ride with all of the twists and the turns and the forward movement and the backward movement. I think it's just a very well done thrill ride.
At the end, or you think you're at the end of the ride, and the lady's behind the screen and comes out and is like, "Thank you so much for riding." And then the mummy bursts through, and you kind of fall through this trap door, and there's a whole nother like subterranean level of it. That was super exciting.
Right, and you really can't relax during the ride because there's so much of that. Like you start off, you enter into this room where there's a voiceover that just kind of promises gold and riches, and all these mummies kind of shoot up from the side, and then you just take off. And then it's like you can't ever relax during the ride because you never know when it's going to officially end. The overall theme of the ride is that you are visiting the movie set and seeing all of these interviews with cast and crew where they are talking about these weird things that have been happening on the set of the movie. And all of that is because the mummy is actually there. Things are not going well. And so you are kind of thrown into that story when you're on the ride. At the end of the ride, there's another video of Brendan Fraser saying, "I would have enjoyed this interview a lot more if I had gotten my cup of coffee," and then this mummified hand comes out and hands it to him. Anyway, that's the shirt that I have on today.
Yeah, Sarah has merch on. She's wearing mummy merch from the Mummy ride in Universal Studios.
Exactly.
Let's segue in a little bit here to the cast. We've mentioned Brendan Fraser a couple times. Before we kick it to break, I think we got to go in and talk a little bit about this cast.
Of course, Brendan Fraser again plays the main character, Rick O'Connell, in the movie. We also have Rachel Weisz. She plays the main love interest, let's call it. She's a librarian who ends up on this journey. So kind of the archetype character who shouldn't be really doing all of this adventuring, but she has the knowledge.
She also is the archetype sexy librarian, which
yes.
I have notes on as we get into the plot.
They
sure.
really play into that, absolutely.
If librarians looked like Rachel Weisz, people would be so educated in America. Everybody would be going to the local library, taking advantage of all the books, CDs, programming, the free printing at libraries. Big fan over here.
And her brother, Jonathan, is played by John Hannah, who has, I feel like he plays the same type of character, and he's in like every movie.
He's a character actor. The Mummy, I think, is a bootleg Billy Zane. Throughout the course of the movie, I was thinking, why didn't they just get Billy Zane to do this? It seems like it's just an easy tee-up that they whiffed on.
And of course, the movie's called The Mummy, so we have the Mummy himself, who is Arnold Vosloo. I think that's how you say his name.
AKA bootleg Billy Zane. He is the Kirkland signature version. The entire time I was watching the movie, I thought, why couldn't they have sprung for Billy? What are we doing here? He was fine. In the titular role is, what's his name?
Imhotep.
Okay. Yes. What's the actor's name?
Arnold Vosloo.
Arnold, who naturally just slayed the titular role of the Mummy.
So that is our cast of characters. Let's kind of circle back and talk a little bit about Brendan Fraser before we cut it to a break and get into the plot of the story. So Sam, I know you have opinions. Of course.
Of course. Well, I don't think I've ever had an opinion in my life. The main question that I have is, what do you know about Brendan Fraser? Because we are a little bit of a different generation. Tell me what you know about Brendan Fraser.
I mean, I think my first introduction to Brendan Fraser was George of the Jungle, which was a favorite movie of mine for a long period of time.
Classic, long hair.
Classic. Exactly. It's hilarious. The soundtrack is amazing.
So I say this because Brendan Fraser, obviously, I think it's been very well documented in recent years, had some trauma happen to him in Hollywood.
Right.
Became a recluse and is now having a resurgence. He won the Academy Award for The Whale, popped up in Killers of the Flower Moon for a small bit part here. And he's having a resurgence that I think society is really cheering him on for. What I will tell you is how I know Brendan Fraser and how I love Brendan Fraser are movies before The Mummy. Let's talk about Encino Man. Have you seen Encino Man?
It's been a long time. I forgot about that one.
Okay, so for listeners, he is a caveman that is dug up by Sean Astin and Pauly Shore, and he's learning he's like a Croatoan man who's learning how to go to high school. The other one that I have, hands down, and this will be a future episode, especially if you love Brendan Fraser, the 1994 comedy film Airheads, which is Brendan Fraser, Steve Buscemi, and Adam Sandler, who play a garage band that want to get their music on the radio. So they hold a radio station hostage with water guns filled with hot sauce. And it is my favorite Brendan Fraser movie. It is hilarious, especially because you got Buscemi and Adam Sandler. Have you seen that one?
I don't think I have.
Okay, so next season, we're absolutely going to do that.
Sure.
And then another gem from Brendan Fraser right after is 1997, 1998. He did a movie with Elizabeth Hurley called Bedazzled, where she is the devil and she grants him 3 wishes. And he plays a variety of different characters for himself. That's hilarious. So
awesome.
For me, all of those movies were pre The Mummy, and I enjoy them so much. And I just think it's really funny because if I had a chance to talk to Brendan Fraser now, those would be the 3 movies I would talk to him about. But specifically, I would talk to him about Airheads and Bedazzled. I don't care about what you did for the role of the whale. I don't care about you coming back. I want to know what it was like on the set of Airheads. I'm a fan of Brendan Fraser, I would say, but of him, I would say kind of in his prime before he took his break. It is surprising to me how when I sat down and started thinking of all of his movies and the movies that obviously mean there's a lot of joy that is being expressed right now, that I just kind of noped out on The Mummy. And I think it's probably because I didn't view him as an action star. I don't know. The Mummy's interesting. Indiana Jones, number 1 is Harrison Ford, so he's rugged and he can get it no matter what. Like Harrison Ford can get it right now. But I don't know if there were really these nerdy type of action heroes. I didn't know that I guess I thought Brendan Fraser could kind of fit in that role. I think that's a lot more acceptable now, and I think The Mummy probably really directed some of that. Like I was thinking about, do you remember the series The Librarian with Noah Wyle?
Oh yes.
So I did a little bit of research on that. That was all after The Mummy. 5, 6, 7 years was the source material. I just can't help but feel like this really kind of made it mainstream, and I was excited to see him as an action star. And I know that right when we come back from break, we're going to get into the plot and we can dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I think what we'll find as we get into the plot is this movie kind of towed a couple of lines, right? We already talked about George Romero being involved. They really were kind of towing the line between the effects of some of the mummies were getting a little bit graphic, but they weren't really going for that horror aspect. They wanted more action adventure. But then we have Brendan Fraser, who is known for doing comedy, coming into this main character role and kind of bringing in some comedic aspects. So I think they were kind of towing the line of a couple of different genres as they were making this.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, I think overall, I did find the tone to be uneven, and I felt like it was almost two different movies at times because, to your point, Sarah, I think they were bringing all of these different elements in. Is it a family-friendly film? Is it horror? Is it romance? I think they do a pretty good job of patching it all together, but it is interesting to kind of hear already that that's some of your thoughts or maybe how that all came into it. But
yeah, but before we get into the plot any more than that, we're going to cut it to break, and then we'll really dig into everything when we come back. From break, we are digging into the plot of the 1999 adventure action film, The Mummy. To start off this movie, we get a little background of some of these characters that are going to be important and this overall plot, where we are shown ancient Egypt, where we have Pharaoh, his priest, Imhotep, and his mistress, Anck-Su-Namun, which is a really hard name to say, and I hope we don't have to say it a lot.
Let's just call her the Pharaoh Queen.
The Pharaoh Queen, sure.
What I would say is it a little bit of background? Because I have a note here that says it's exposition soup. Okay. The first 7 or 8 minutes is a narrator explaining, this is so-and-so, this is here, this is why this is what this person's about to do, this is why this person's angry, this is why this person, to me, it felt like all of the setup was really narrated. There is Pharaoh Queen, and BLBZ, Bootleg Billy Zane, as Imhotep. Those are the 3 ones that are starting.
Right. I think that's fair because I do remember thinking this most recent time that I watched this, man, this is taking a lot longer than I remember, but the whole point of the movie is this mummy coming back, and if we don't really know why he's coming back and why he's feeling what he's feeling, then...
But I just feel like show don't tell. The one thing that I thought was okay was they at least then, after the first 7 or 10 minutes of the movie where they lay all the groundwork, they at least then show the narrator. The narrator's like, I know because I was there. And then he's like a character. And I said, okay, At least they put the narrator on screen. But it was a little bit tedious.
Right.
Long story short, BLBZ is like getting it in with the Pharaoh Queen behind the Pharaoh's back. And Pharaoh finds out. And Sarah, note here, how does the Pharaoh find out? Pharaoh Queen's paint is smudged. So very ACOTAR. Let's talk about that. He notices the smudged paint and says, someone's been touching you.
I knew you were going to say that.
Rhysand is a fan of the Mummy. That is canon.
Apparently.
The Mummy exists in ACOTAR.
Right. And he was probably thinking, how can I show Tamlin that I'm not messing around? Oh, I'll just take a note out of Pharaoh's book and I'll just clean her up. So yes, Anck-Su-Namun is covered in paint almost completely. And the idea is no one's allowed to touch her because the paint will smudge and Pharaoh will find out, and he does. So then she and Imhotep kill him.
And I mean, they just really, like, right away, what terrible security. Pharaoh walks in on them.
Right.
And they just murder him in front of 10 guards.
Exactly. Well, they were Imhotep's lackeys, though, so I don't know. He had a lot of control, apparently.
I guess. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe I should have listened to the narration closer.
Anyway, so already they've got this kind of whole mummification resurrection thing planned out because Anck-Su-Namun says, hey, Imhotep, you've got to run because you're the only one who can resurrect me when I'm killed. and I'm about to be killed right now. So he runs away, and she is immediately killed by Pharaoh's guards.
So then Imhotep follows the guards to where they are burying the Pharaoh Queen, because apparently you still do all of the burial rituals for the Pharaoh Queen who just killed the Pharaoh in front of you. And he decides that he's going to do a resurrection curse for Pharaoh Queen. And it feels like she's coming alive, you know? She's starting to levitate a little bit. Her eyelids flutter. She's ready to go, and we're all excited. And nope, it's a big giant trap, and Pharaoh's men capture Imhotep before he can complete the ritual of bringing Pharaoh Queen back to life.
Exactly. So his guards are, or his priests, whatever they are mummified alive, and Imhotep is given a much worse punishment, apparently. They cut out his tongue, they put him in a sarcophagus with scarab beetles, which in this movie are flesh-eating bugs, and he is kind of cursed to live for eternity being tortured, but if he's ever released, things would be very bad. So Sarah, I'm not quite sure how that's really a punishment for him and not for the rest of the world, but that's what they go with.
Sarah, I'm stuck on the name you called the coffin.
Sarcophagus?
Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard that term before.
Oh, really? That's what they call it.
In the movie?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
See, I tuned out on the narration. I would have just said coffin. No, I just feel like that's a new word. Even though there are no Egyptian people cast in this movie, they did have that detail correct of the time. So,
of course, it was the 90s, right? Everyone that was cast was white, but we did our research as far as the history.
It does get a little bit when you're watching it. It does get a little bit on like, this is moving dangerously close to essentially blackface, but for this culture. But like that's a whole different
it was
thing.
The 90s.
It was the 90s. A sarcophagus. Got it. He gets put into a sarcophagus. It does seem like they could have just killed him.
Right. So anyway, that is the backstory that we are given about this mummy. Cut to several hundreds of years later, we are introduced to Brendan Fraser's character, Rick O'Connell. He is serving in the French Foreign Legion, and he is in this city called Hamunaptra with the French Foreign Legion fighting the Magi, who are these protectors of that area, specifically to make sure that nobody resurrects this mummy and causes this curse on all of the people.
And you find out that the one Magi is the narrator, so at least we get to see him.
Yes, so there is that little bit of clarification.
So Brendan Fraser is mid-exploration, and he love taps a statue. And I say love taps because if I hit a car and as gently nudged it as Rick O'Connell nudges this statue, I wouldn't even leave a note, right? I mean, it literally is like a little, almost like a feather. He just gently backs into it, and the sand starts moving, and it reveals this gigantic skull, which I will say I thought was really cool, especially considering it was 1999 and CGI. And at this juncture, everyone's like, oh my gosh. Again, Sarah, to your point, you have an army of people trying to prevent the disturbance of the mummy. But it really seems like very easily you're able to kind of uncover and maybe start the process of, okay, well, this is where the mummy is. So one thing I do like is after the exposition soup, they do get right into it. You don't really have a big wind up into who Brendan Fraser is. He's just mid-adventure and very handy with a revolver.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're also introduced very briefly to somebody else that's in his unit. That person's name is Benny, and he is set up as a coward pretty early on. he runs away as soon as the action kind of starts, but he will play a role later. So
Brendan Fraser kind of seems like he embraces the cowardness. He's like, well, you're just going to run and I'm going to go fight these guys. And that's exactly what happens.
Pretty much,
During
yes.
some sort of the melee, Brendan Fraser is captured and they flash forward to 3 years later.
At this point, we are introduced to Rachel Weisz's character, Evelyn, or Evie. Again, she is the sexy librarian character. So when we first meet her, she is in a library, of course, working with these ancient Egyptian texts.
Sarah, she has her glasses off 30 seconds after that character is introduced on screen.
Right. It's so fast.
It is so fast. There's no wind up to it.
It is so fast. She is introduced as being this scholar, and then the glasses come off immediately. She's also just kind of awkward, too.
And I will say, Sarah, she's adorkable. She was adorkable before Zooey Deschanel even tried to trademark that. So,
right, exactly.
Cute, quirky, into Egyptian texts, and listen to this, she's single on top of it because she's just too busy trying to, crack Egyptian artifacts.
Of course she is. So we are then very quickly introduced to her brother, Jonathan, who arrives with this puzzle box that he found, which also includes a map to this ancient city of Hamunaptra, which is where the mummy is, where all of these riches are supposed to be, where pharaohs and other royals are supposed to be buried. The key part here is that no one is able to find that city unless, of course, you've already been there. So the fact that he just happened to find a map to Hamunaptra is huge. She is all excited about it. And her boss just accidentally catches the map on fire, which is kind of a weird point.
I said right away he burned it on purpose. Spoiler alert.
Right.
Of course.
They play it up like it. Like, oh man, I can't.
It's campy. Like that's the thing. Yes. It's campy at the beginning. And I said this guy's bad, and he's not bad, but he doesn't want them looking for the map. Is clear.
Right. So they are both disappointed that they no longer have this map to Hamunaptra. Evie starts questioning him. Where did you find it? And he says, I won it off of this person who's now a prisoner. And of course, that person is Rick O'Connell.
And a feral Brendan Fraser at that. Let's call him #feral Fraser. Okay. It is his tryout for George of the Jungle. He has long hair. I mean, he looks good. He's planting a non-consenting smooch on Rachel Weisz right away. But that's because he's going to be hung within the next 45 seconds. And they strike up a quick deal of, hey, if you can literally save my neck, I'll take you over to the place. So that's an intense couple 5 minutes or so. But she decides, listen, I am going to say this right from the beginning. Okay. Right from the beginning. She obviously is interested in getting to the city. It's the pinnacle of all of her research and her work. But she also knows that he's hot and that she will never find a sexier tour guide to take her where she needs to go. I mean, their chemistry at the beginning is really kind of palpable. He lays a smooch on her right away, so she knows what she's working with from the onset.
Where she bribes the warden, and the warden decides to tag along with them for a percentage of whatever they find when Rick gets them to Hamunaptra. Interestingly enough, I did read, Sam, that Brendan Fraser almost died while filming the hanging scene because he was literally hanging from a rope for a period of time and was unconscious after that, and it was a whole thing. But anyway.
Brendan's been through so much. He's been through so much. So they agree to go on this journey. We have a glow-up moment when Brendan Fraser comes back and he's got the short hair and he's wearing the adventuring clothes. Listen, he looks good. For me, the glow up is the long hair feral, not the clean cut, short hair. I get both looks. I know the movie was trying to make it a glow up for him. It was a glow down for me.
I see. So hashtag Farrell Fraser is gone, and he is now more put together. Let's call it back to his pre-prison look, right? Because it is similar to the look we had when he was in the French Foreign Legion.
French Fraser.
French Fraser, yeah. So we're back to French Fraser. They are boarding a boat to begin their journey to Hamunaptra. While they are on the boat, they meet a group of American treasure hunters who are also going to Hamunaptra, led by none other than Benny, the coward who ran away while fighting with Rick in the French Foreign Legion. He has been promised quite a bit of money to take these Americans there.
The brother, Jonathan, note here, I said in all caps, loose lips sink ships, dickwad. Yes. So he's playing some sort of game, poker with the American expeditioners, and he's like, I got so-and-so, and this is where we're going, and this is all the things we're doing. And Brendan Fraser comes up and tries to disavow a lot of it, gives a little bit of misinformation, and says, what are you doing, bro? What are you doing?
Right. He's definitely more of that like playboy character, just gambling, drinking. If there were women on the boat, he would have been all over them, but he is not. He's more interested in the treasure, of course, than any of the historical aspects of Hamunaptra, any of the literary things that Evie's interested in. He just wants the money.
She's very impressed that French Fraser knows exactly what you're saying. She's like, you know, your history, just to drive home your point, it was a cute little interaction. She says to him, you know, your history. And he's like, I know my treasure. And that's where we intersect.
Right. So while they're on the boat is attacked by the Medjai. Again, that is the group that is protecting Hamunaptra to make sure that nobody brings back the mummy. So they somehow get wind that these two groups of people are on their way there, and they just attack the boat and try to derail everything. The boat catches on fire. Everybody jumps over the side of the boat and then have to continue their journey on land.
I will say, it wasn't narrated for me, so I can't be sure, but I would imagine it was Jonathan running his mouth to all people that gave the Magi the hint of it. And also during this melee, I mean, the whole sexy nerd thing, okay? Rachel Weisz is in a nightgown that is white, and she is wet from swimming in the lake or the ocean to get out of it. And does this whole, oh, I left all my clothes on the boat. Oh my gosh. Man, all I have is this wet white nightgown. I don't care that it goes down to your ankles and that it's maybe modest in the cabin of your ship. We are doing a Hollywood blockbuster. She will have her glasses off in 30 seconds and she will be in a wet white nightgown within the first 45 minutes, or we are not greenlighting this movie. That's what it felt like.
Of course. So, of course, she left all of her clothes on board and has nothing to change into. They also don't have any way to travel because the horses from the boat are all on the other side of the river. So they do have to stop to get some camels and also for a quick wardrobe change into something a little more desert appropriate.
And so they end up traveling to find the city of the dead. I'm not going to try to say it. So the city of the dead. And again, they just come across Benny and the Americans on the road there. Sarah, I was just surprised. They're staring into this empty Sahara desert and say, just wait for it. The city's going to come a lot. Like something needs to happen and the city's going to be here. And from what I could discern, again, maybe I'm too harsh on the narrator because maybe I do need it narrated for me. From what I could discern, the sun just moved to high noon and the entire city appears. But it was completely invisible to the naked eye when the sun was at 11:59. Am I correct in that?
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
Okay.
Those shadows do mysterious things.
So again, we decide to make a mummy that can release plagues instead of killing him. We keep him very loosely guarded that love taps can start doing all of this. And then I guess there's something about hiding in plain sight. I don't know about you, but I think the sun hits high noon every single day.
Right. And I would think there would be people out in the desert every single day. So the chances of somebody just accidentally stumbling across this cursed mummy are pretty good. Anyway.
It's 1999 in a simpler time, and this is a popcorn blockbuster, Sarah. And we are going to get into the City of the Dead and what makes this a popcorn blockbuster right after the break.
We're back from break. We are going to dive back into The Mummy right when the action really starts to pick up. So both of these groups have made it to Hamunaptra, the City of the Dead, and they are now kind of deciding where each group is going to start digging for treasure.
Brendan Fraser and Benny have this ongoing type of bet that's who can get their group to be successful and find the treasure first. And it becomes a little bit of a, well, I wouldn't even say a little bit. It's a competition. At this point, I'm still unsure of Benny's character and what we're supposed to think about him. It becomes pretty campy once they start getting into the city and they start digging around and start looking for the treasure, but in a really good way. In the 90s tropes, it felt very 90s in a time capsule way that I thought was really endearing and really fun. And so at this point I thought, okay, I get what this movie is. It is campy, it's family fun, it's a blockbuster, obviously doesn't take itself too seriously. And then the mummy gets awakened.
So before the mummy wakes up, there's this argument between both groups of who gets to dig where. The Americans want to dig by the statue of Anubis. Everyone's looking for the Book of Amun-Ra, which is made out of solid gold. So that's kind of the ultimate treasure they're trying to find. They initially put up a little bit of a fight, and then Evie says, I have a better idea. They go underneath the statue and decide to dig from the bottom, hoping that they can reach whatever's inside before the Americans do. The Americans end up finding the Book of the Dead, which is not made out of solid gold. They also find these canopic jars that hold organs from the mummification process. Evie and her crew find a sarcophagus, and they discover that this little puzzle box that Jonathan had is actually a key that they can use to open the sarcophagus. And inside, they find a very juicy mummy.
A very juicy mummy.
Shouldn't be that juicy.
Oh, look, the sacred spells have been chiseled off. This man must have been condemned not only in this life, but in the next.
Tough break.
Yeah, I'm over cheers. All right. See who's inside, shall we?
God, I hate it when these things do that.
Is he supposed to look like that?
No, I've never seen a mummy look like this before. He's still
Juicy.
Meanwhile, the Americans decide to have the men that are leading them open up. Are we going to call that a sarcophagus as well?
Sure.
Okay, so the Americans go, we don't want to do this. We just want the treasure. So why don't you guys open that? So, take that for what you will. And these men are sprayed with some sort of vapor and they die right away. It's funny because I can't even remember, although I'm sure you know what it is. What is the name of the substance that they are sprayed with?
I actually don't know. I think it's some form of acid, though.
It's just funny to me because this is supposed to be the 1920s and word reaches Brendan Fraser and his group and they say right away, oh yeah, they were sprayed with, and they say this like really long name of the gas forth. And I thought, wow, people can just diagnose that so quickly and see that and are like, no, that's probably what happened. They just evaporated. So shenanigans then start to ensue underground. The warden has a beetle get into his body and eat his brain from the inside out. Meanwhile, the curse book is found, and Rachel Weisz, for all of her awesomeness and excitedness about Egyptology, can't seem to control the urge to just open the curse book and read out loud incantations, because what could possibly go wrong if you are doing that?
Definitely not something involving a very juicy mummy. The mummy is awake and he starts killing people and kind of like absorbing their body parts in their flesh. So he takes the one guy's eyes and his tongue so that the mummy has eyes and tongue, and it's kind of gross. Anyway, in addition to that, there are also these plagues that are happening with the darkness and the locusts and like the traditional like plagues of Egypt.
He basically is like a Mr. Potato Head where he's selecting all the various parts that he wants from people. However, it's to make him look like Billy Zane. So maybe he's just trying to, maybe that's how he comes together.
That's true. That's true. So, of course, the Magi then get involved because they find out that the creature has been awakened and they need to find a way to stop him. And again, the whole goal that the mummy has is just to resurrect Anck-Su-Namun. So he is looking for her remains. He's looking for the canopic jars with her organs inside. And now, because it's been such a long time, he also needs a human sacrifice, which Evie, of course, is the perfect candidate for that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, there's a little bit, I would say, over the next 30 minutes or so, he starts tracking down all of the Americans that have the jars and kill them all. And he gets a little bit stronger each one. Very Voldemort Horcrux, if we're being honest, you know, kind of collecting all this, and he's getting a little bit stronger. Brendan Fraser, I think, really does a nice job here from an action perspective. And what's nice about him and Evie is they're just into each other, and there's not any will they, won't they. Just from the beginning, they both kind of really vocalize that they're into each other. So I think it becomes a mix of, can they figure out how to stop him faster than he can get all of his Mr. Potato Head parts together and resurrect his wife.
So from this point on, I think it's a pretty quick succession of him trying to acquire all of his Mr. Potato Head parts and everything that he needs to do this resurrection ceremony, and everyone else trying to figure out a way to stop him. Evie is pretty sure that if they find the Book of Amun-Ra, that gold book they were initially looking for, there will be some sort of spell in there to stop him. So they make that their mission, to get back and find that book. In the process, she is kidnapped by the mummy and kind of tied up on an altar to be this sacrifice so that he can bring back his dead side piece. Rick and Jonathan and the narrator, we'll call him, are trying to get back to Hamunaptra to help her out. So they recruit this super old Air Force captain with a death wish, Captain Winston Havelock or something like that. And he flies them on basically a suicide mission to save Evie.
As he starts to kill the Americans, unleash the plagues, I actually feel like at this part, the movie takes a very dark turn.
Mm-hmm.
So where, as I said before, I'm like, oh, it's campy and it's a blockbuster and it's a mindless. Then all of a sudden it gets really sinister. They really go all in on the CGI effects, and some of them really hold up well and some of them don't, but you can appreciate that for 1999. Like, I kept trying to think, what would I have felt like though if I would have seen this in my early teens, and it is 1999, but it did get a little bit scary. Again, this is kind of where the tone shifts. It almost feels like two different movies. And I think the one big thing about this is Benny, of course, flees and leaves the Americans, and his honor is always for sale. And he ends up teaming up with the Mummy and being the Mummy's bitter then in an effort to try to save his own hide. And again, with no sense of any type of moral compass at all, he decides, nope, I'm going to go full sinister now. And so whereas I was unsure on him before, now it's like, okay, Benny's a douche. He's just a douche.
Yeah, I mean, he's loyal to the highest bidder.
Self-serving.
Sure. Yes. So he is kind of his lackey in making sure that all of the Mummy's plans play out the way that he wants them to. So as they are trying to rescue Evie, of course, the Mummy's becoming more powerful. He's using the Book of the Dead to resurrect other mummies, guards, his priests that can help protect him while he's going through with this resurrection ceremony. And so Rick and the Magi and Jonathan have to fight off all of these other mummies that, again, they didn't have those abilities when they were alive, but now they can crawl on the walls and do all these crazy things.
I will also say there's another non-consenting kiss. The Mummy kisses Rachel Weisz again. So studio execs, her glasses are going to be off. She's going to be a wet t-shirt contest, and men are just going to be able to kiss her whenever they want to. That's just what's going to happen.
That's pretty much it. So they get about halfway through the resurrection process where Anck-Su-Namun's corpse is now an animated mummy, but she's just still dead and crusty and gross. Now Evie is fighting her, and Jonathan has found the Book of Amun-Ra, and he's trying to find the spell that's going to let him defeat the mummy. He's trying to remember how to read these hieroglyphics. Evie's trying to help him while she's fighting off this mummy. Rick's fighting all of these other mummies. And eventually, all of the pieces fall into place where Jonathan controls the mummy army. He has them kill the dead lady. And he's able to find the spell to defeat the mummy. And he just kind of dissolves back into his gross corpse and says, death is only the beginning, which is something that he mentioned at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of just wraps up. Good action. I would say it's good action. And I like that they make Rachel Weisz's character a fighter. She's not a damsel in distress by any means. Brendan Fraser, I think, does play the role pretty well. It's hard for me to say. I mean, I guess it works. I guess I didn't realize it was set in the 20s. It definitely works with him having little revolvers and torches and things like that. I don't know that I'd buy it if he was having an AK-47.
Right.
You know what I mean? I don't know that that's Brendan Fraser's weapon of choice, but I think it ties up. But it does get scary. I mean, I know I said it a little bit earlier, but it does get really scary. And you're just like, what? Let me put it this way. That escalated quickly. That's basically what you could say about The Mummy. It's all fun. From the viewing experience to the plot experience to The Mummy, I mean, he gets stronger and he is ready to go.
Yeah, and again, we're kind of towing that line between action and horror, and with the effects for the time, there, it was nominated for quite a few awards for the makeup and the effects. So I think for the 90s, it was definitely, I don't know if I'd say peak, but it was up there.
The other thing is, I think what you see in the 90s, there's a 90s trope in here where a character gets caught in quicksand. I did go on a little quicksand side tangent, and I do think it's so funny because in the movies, the quicksand, they sink in 7 seconds and you breathe. And my understanding of quicksand is it moves a lot slower, that even the tallest person, you would only ever sink to about your waist. And yes, it's hard for you to get out and or maybe impossible for you to get out, but it's not that you suffocate and drown in quicksand. It's that you get stuck in it and predators or other things come and eat you because you can't move away. But I always do think it's funny. I think I read something that said the trope of quicksand in action movies I think it was in the 70s and 80s. I think the stat is something like 9% of all movies made during this time had some sort of quicksand scene in it. So
Right.
that felt very 90s. I don't know that I've seen a quicksand scenes. I don't know. I don't watch a lot of movies like this though. So yeah.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think with going back to the scarab beetles too, like in real life, they are not flesh eating, but that was a major plot point in the story. We didn't see it in the movie, but in the novelization, the way that the mummy's curse works is that the scarabs eat him and then he eats the scarabs. And it's just this gross cycle for thousands of years. So I think they're definitely just exaggerating these elements to kind of make it work with the movie.
It sounds like an eating disorder of the worst kind.
Absolutely.
So everything is settled. We get a nice smooch between Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz.
Right.
And Benny gets eaten by the scarab. So he ends up getting his just desserts.
Yes. And of course, as we get that kiss, they're riding off into the sunset, romance style. It definitely is. It's very tropey for sure.
However, unbeknownst to them, have a piece of stolen treasure on the camel that they're riding away on. So obviously they were setting this up for a sequel almost right away.
Of course. That is it for The Mummy.
So I do have one thing real quick here.
Yeah.
You had mentioned it a little bit in the cultural notes, but I want to take a moment to discuss the Scorpion King because I'd never seen this. And I genuinely do believe that the Scorpion King is what launched Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson into Hollywood. And have you seen the Scorpion King?
I've seen parts of it. I don't think I've seen the full movie, but I've seen maybe like half of it. So the second movie, The Mummy, is obviously the mummy that we talked about today. Spoilers. Comes back and finds somebody else to resurrect Anck-Su-Namun. So it's like a Jurassic Park type thing. Like there's always like a bigger predator. So basically what Evie and Rick and their son end up doing is they resurrect the Scorpion King to defeat the mummy. So in the second movie, you get a little bit of the background of the Scorpion King, and they just completely then rolled with it and made it an entire movie.
Is The Rock the Scorpion King in the second movie?
Yes.
So I'm just being clear because obviously I haven't seen the second one. So The Rock beats, and is it the same mummy?
Yeah.
So is it bootleg Billy Zane?
It is bootleg Billy Zane, yes.
Okay, so The Rock beats BLBZ and number 2?
It starts off the same way with all of the exposition. This is who the Scorpion King is. Here's how he got that name, blah, 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 blah. And then we dive into the actual plot of Rick and Evie and their son and everything. And then the prequel is just
how he became the Scorpion King.
They take those like 7 minutes of exposition and they just stretch it out into an entire movie.
It's another exposition soup.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
They all kind of start that way. At least I haven't seen the reboot, but the 3 main ones that are in with these characters, they all kind of start out that way.
Yeah, it's just a little bit mind-blowing to me that this is the franchise that really launched The Rock, because I think from there he really got in, and look at him now. So
right,
that's
it's
interesting.
wild. And it's also wild now that we're talking about the second one, that this one was like so acclaimed for the effects and the makeup, and I think the CGI in the second one is horrible. So, I mean, maybe I would have felt differently, and it was probably like 2000, 2001. I don't think it holds up as well.
You have mentioned the reboot a couple times, which stars Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise was in consideration for the role, but they cast Brendan Fraser instead. So it is wild a little bit to see it come full circle. But you said you have not seen the reboot.
Right, I haven't seen that one.
And I don't know that did super well at the box office, because I'm sure we would have had a second movie in the reboot franchise if it was good.
Right. When I was looking up just to see when it came out and who was in it and everything, I think I read it did not do very well. But I think I did read that there are talks of making another Mummy with the main cast. So I think that is...
I don't think we need it.
I don't
we
think
don't
so
need
either.
it.
don't
And
think
I'm sorry,
either.
Brendan Fraser is not in that shape anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I really enjoyed the first one. Second one is, I think it's a fun sequel. I don't think it's as good, but when is a sequel ever as good as the first one? And the third one, I don't really like to talk about. Wrapping up our discussion of The Mummy today, Sam, since this was your first time watching, give us a snappy 30-second review. What did you think?
30-second review. It's enjoyable in the sense of it's a late 90s treasure. And clearly, as we've been talking through here, it did have an effect on culture. So I was overdue to see it. I do think it is a little bit of a lightning in a bottle situation in the sense of it felt like it was the right cast at the right time, that the CGI for the time was there. And it was really kind of coming in on the tail end of what 90s action movies were. So I think it all comes together and it works. I am not surprised that a reboot of it did not work in 2017, even with Tom Cruise being there to star. So I thought it was interesting. It was a lightning in a bottle situation. I appreciated that.
Yeah, so would you recommend it to somebody else? And knowing that there's more to this franchise, do you think that you would consume any of the other movies or shows associated with it?
I would recommend it because I do think that it's a movie franchise that's really solid and it's cool to watch. I will not be actively seeking out and saying, oh my gosh, I have to watch 2 and 3 in the reboot, but I likely will get around to doing it at some point.
All right, so let's rate it and compare it to a Little Debbie snack cake.
I would compare it to a seasonal Nutty Buddy.
Okay, that's an interesting choice.
And, you know, for all of our, this is whatever number episode we have here, there are a lot of classic Little Debbies that we have not gotten into yet. And we haven't gotten into the Nutty Buddies. I would say that the Nutty Buddies are always on shelves. They're always around. And I absolutely understand the appeal and why people will grab them and they're satisfied with them. For me, I walk past the Nutty Buddies and I've walked past the Mummy for 25 years, but I'm aware of it, right? And occasionally I'll enjoy it. Like I'll enjoy the ride, or I know Brendan Fraser was in it. Now, lately, what Little Debbie has started to do is to do these seasonal Nutty Buddies. And instead of them being these peanut butter wafers with chocolate on it, they're now kind of covered with white chocolate and they have some sort of icing or little decoration. They have 4th of July, they have holiday. I actually really enjoy the seasonal Nutty Buddies. It's a little bit sweeter, a little bit harder to find. You know, you don't see the Mummy running on television a lot. It kind of feels like a little bit of a forgotten franchise. A little bit of a facelift in 2017 with the Tom Cruise Mummy. I'm making some stretches here, but I compared it to the seasonal Nutty Buddy. Classic, better than I thought. I enjoyed it. But again, would only maybe try to take a look at indulging it seasonally when I was looking to do so.
Yeah, I think that's a fair comparison. I think this one is a Swiss roll for me. This is a movie that I have enjoyed watching for a long time. It's something that I can always go back to, and I know that it's going to be exactly what I want it to be. And I think that's a Swiss roll for me. It's nostalgic in some senses. It's consistent. I know what I'm getting with it. So I think The Mummy is a Swiss roll.
Do you have any Mummy Funkos?
I don't have any Mummy Funkos. No, the only Mummy merch that I have is this shirt. And it's only because when I go to Universal and Disney with my family, we always get matching t-shirts. So this was our Universal t-shirt from a couple of years ago. I don't own any Mummy merch specifically from the movie. This is just the only thing.
Listen, I'm into it. I'm just happy that you are venturing past Disney when you go down to Orlando and trying Universal.
I do like to broaden my horizons a little bit when I can.
Well, that is it for the season 3 premiere of Foreign and Familiar. If you are a fan of The Mummy, if you want to talk Little Debbies, we'd love to hear from you. Follow us on Instagram at FauxFamPod. on our newly launched YouTube channel at FauxFamPod, or send us an email at foreignandfamiliar@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening.
Bye. Thanks for eavesdropping on us.
If you can't get enough of the Cousin Chronicles, head over to Instagram and follow at FauxFamPod for more in-depth info and behind-the-scenes details.
Or email us at foreignfamiliarpod@gmail.com.
Foreign and Familiar is a Flynn & Flynn production.
The theme is Colorful by Allerlie von Nicolai.